The story of how I took revenge on my neighbor for her curiosity and encroachment on my personal space. Living abroad was supposed to be an adventure. That's what I told myself when I accepted the job that came with free accommodation in a foreign country. A new culture to explore, new people to meet, and best of all, a break from the mundanity of life back home. But no one warned me that sometimes the people you meet abroad can turn your dream experience into a nightmare. The company had put us, 3 women who barely knew each other, in a small crammed apartment in a city that pulsed with energy day and night. The rent was covered by our employer, which was the only thing that kept us there longer than a week. If we had been paying for it ourselves, we would have been out of there faster than you could say refund. The apartment itself wasn't terrible. It was small, sure, with just enough space for a living room and 3 small bedrooms, but it was clean and functional. The issue wasn't the apartment, it was one of the roommates. Her name was Lydia, and at first glance, she seemed like an ordinary enough person. A bit quiet, a bit nosy, but nothing that raised immediate red flags. She was the main tenant, the one who had been there the longest, which, I assume, gave her a false sense of authority over the rest of us. Lydia wasn't just nosy, she was invasive. But it took me a little while to figure that out. The first week or so passed without incident. We were all still adjusting to the new job, the new environment, the new everything. Lydia kept to herself mostly, aside from the occasional forced small talk in the kitchen. But as the days went by, little things started to seem off. At first, it was just a feeling, a sixth sense that something wasn't right. My roommate Sarah, the other girl who lived in the apartment, was the first to notice. One evening, she came into the living room, her face pale, holding a letter she had received from her family back home. "Did you move my stuff?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I looked up from my book, confused. "What do you mean?" "I left this letter in my drawer," Sarah said, waving the envelope. "But when I got home, it was on my bed. I know I didn't leave it there." I frowned, feeling a pang of unease. "Maybe you just forgot?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "I never leave my things out like that." A cold chill ran down my spine. I had noticed something similar. Items in my room had been slightly out of place, things I knew I hadn't touched, but I had brushed it off, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid in a new environment. Now I wasn't so sure. It didn't take long for us to figure out what was happening. Lydia was snooping through our things. At first it seemed impossible. Why would a grown woman behave like a character from a bad TV drama? But the evidence was mounting, and it was becoming harder to ignore. We started setting little traps, moving objects slightly, placing hairs across our drawers, and every time we came back to find things disturbed, it became clear. Lydia was indeed rummaging through our stuff whenever we weren't around. We confronted her, of course. Who wouldn't? But Lydia was a master of gaslighting. She denied everything with such conviction that for a split second, you almost believed her. "Why would I ever go into your rooms?" she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be imagining things." But we knew. The evidence was there, no matter how much she denied it. Letters moved, drawers opened, personal items shifted ever so slightly. It was like living with a ghost, a sneaky, nosy ghost who couldn't keep her hands to herself. Sarah and I weren't the only ones noticing Lydia's odd behavior. She was also leaving her mark at work. Co-workers would complain about missing pens, notebooks, and even snacks from the break room. Lydia always had an explanation. She was borrowing, she thought it was hers, she didn't know who it belonged to. But over time, everyone started to see the pattern. Despite our repeated complaints to our employer, who had set up this housing arrangement, things didn't improve. We were told that since Lydia was the main tenant, she had some level of responsibility for the apartment, though we never figured out how that translated to rifling through our personal belongings. But then there was a turning point, an incident that would become the catalyst for our eventual escape. I came home one afternoon, earlier than usual, hoping to take a nap before heading back out for an evening shift. As I walked into the apartment, I heard a faint noise from down the hall. My heart skipped a beat. It was coming from my room. Quietly, I moved toward the door, careful not to make a sound. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see inside. And there she was, Lydia, rummaging through my dresser drawers with the precision of a burglar. I watched in stunned silence as she moved from drawer to drawer, her hands flipping through my things like they were hers. Rage bubbled up inside me. I'd had enough. I wasn't about to stand by and let this woman continue to invade my privacy. I pushed the door open, the sound of it crashing against the wall startling Lydia. She spun around, her face flushed, eyes wide with panic. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Lydia opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was caught and she knew it. "This is unacceptable," I continued, my voice growing louder. "You have no right to go through my things. What is wrong with you?" Lydia finally found her voice, stammering out a pathetic excuse. I thought I lost something and I was just checking to see if it ended up in here." "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "You've been doing this since we moved in. Sarah and I both know it. You're not fooling anyone." Lydia's face turned red, a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "You have no proof," she hissed, trying to regain control of the situation. "Get out of my room," I said, my voice deadly calm, "and stay out." For a moment, I thought she might try to argue, but then she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart racing. The confrontation had been a long time coming, but it didn't bring the satisfaction I had hoped for. Instead, it left me feeling drained, exhausted from the constant stress of living with someone so invasive. When Sarah came home, I told her what had happened, and we both agreed. It was time to get out of there. We couldn't live like this any longer, constantly looking over our shoulders, wondering what Lydia was up to. We decided to escalate our complaints to the company, demanding that they find us new accommodation. It took weeks of back and forth, of pleading our case to HR, of enduring Lydia's increasingly erratic behavior. But finally, our request was granted. We were being moved to a new apartment, far away from Lydia and her creepy prying ways. On the day we were scheduled to move, Lydia was furious. She had been working when we got the call, and she wouldn't be home until later in the evening. But she knew we were leaving, and it drove her crazy. Her paranoia was palpable, even in the texts she sent us throughout the day, demanding to know what we were planning to do in her absence. I mean, we obviously were planning something, how could we not? After everything she had put us through, we deserved some kind of payback. But the real challenge was figuring out what that would be. We didn't want to stoop to her level, but we also didn't want to leave without making a statement. Sarah and I spent days discussing our options. Should we trash her room? Hide her belongings? Leave a nasty note? None of it felt right. It was all too juvenile, too obvious. We needed something that would get under her skin, something that would drive her crazy, just like she had driven us crazy for months. And then I had the perfect idea. Lydia's room was her sanctuary. She kept it locked at all times, only allowing herself in and out. It was the one place she probably felt safe, where she could conduct her snooping operations without anyone prying into her own private life. The irony of her obsessive need for privacy wasn't lost on us, and it was that irony that sparked the idea. "What if we didn't do anything?" I said to Sarah as we packed up our belongings, trying to sound casual as I floated the idea. Sarah looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we just left her door open?" Sarah's brow furrowed as she processed the suggestion. "Just left it open?" "Yeah," I said, feeling a grin spread across my face as the plan began to take shape in my mind. "We don't touch anything. We don't mess with her stuff. We just pick the lock, leave her door ajar, and let her imagination do the rest." A slow smile crept across Sarah's face as she realized where I was going with this. "She'll go nuts trying to figure out what we did." "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of excitement. "She's been messing with our heads for months. Let's mess with hers. She'll spend weeks, maybe even months, tearing her room apart, wondering what we found, what we took, what we saw. And the best part? We won't have done a thing." Sarah's eyes lit up with mischievous glee. "I love it. It's perfect. It's psychological warfare." We both burst out laughing, the tension of the past few months melting away as we reveled in the brilliance of our plan. It was simple, elegant, and most importantly, it would drive Lydia absolutely mad. When moving day finally arrived, we executed the plan with military precision. We waited until the last possible moment, when our boxes were packed and the movers were ready to go. Then, with bated breath, we approached Lydia's door. The lock was pathetic, Something you'd expect to find on a bathroom door, not on a bedroom in a shared apartment. Sarah had been practicing picking it for weeks, using a set of bobby pins she had found in a forgotten drawer. It took her all of 30 seconds to pop the lock. We stood there for a moment, staring at the door, a mixture of nerves and excitement bubbling up inside us. This was it, the moment of truth. "Ready?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Ready." I reached out and gently pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, the sound echoing through the quiet apartment. We peered inside, taking in the room that had been the source of so much anxiety and frustration. It was exactly what we expected, a cluttered mess of clothes, books, and random knickknacks. But we didn't focus on the details. We didn't even step inside. Instead, we carefully placed a single bobby pin on her desk, a subtle hint that something had been unlocked, something had been opened. And then, with a shared look of triumph, we left. The drive to our new apartment was filled with laughter and high fives. We couldn't stop giggling at the thought of Lydia coming home, finding her door open, and losing her mind as she tried to figure out what we had done. We imagined her searching every inch of her room, checking and rechecking her belongings, trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't exist. By the time we arrived at our new place, we were giddy with excitement. The apartment was a breath of fresh air, bright, spacious, and most importantly, Lydia-free. We unpacked our things, settling into our new home with a sense of peace that we hadn't felt in months. But the best part came the next day at work. Lydia was waiting for us when we arrived, her face flushed with anger, her eyes wild with paranoia. She cornered us in the break room, demanding to know what we had done. "What did you do to my room?" she hissed, her voice low and furious. "I know you were in there. I know you took something. Just tell me what it was." Sarah and I exchanged a quick glance, barely able to contain our amusement. "Lydia," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, "we didn't do anything to your room. Why would we?" "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her hands clenched into fists. "I know you were in there. My door was open. I never leave it open. What did you take? What did you do?" "We didn't touch anything," Sarah said, her tone innocent, almost sweet. "You must have just forgotten to lock it." Lydia's face twisted in frustration. She knew we were lying. At least she thought she did. But there was nothing she could do. No proof, no evidence, nothing to back up her suspicions. The doubt gnawed at her. You could see it in her eyes, in the way she bit her lip, her mind racing through every possible scenario. For weeks, Lydia continued to pester us, her paranoia growing with each passing day. She'd corner us in the hallways, in the break room, even outside the office, demanding to know what we had done. And each time, we'd give her the same innocent, sarcastic denial, fueling her anxiety even more. The satisfaction was sweet. It was everything we had hoped for, and more. Lydia was trapped in her own web of paranoia, her mind spiraling with the possibilities of what we might have done. But the truth, the delicious, ironic truth, was that we had done nothing at all, and that was the best revenge of all. Weeks turned into months, and life in the new apartment settled into a comfortable routine. The tension and stress that had plagued us during our time with Lydia gradually faded away, replaced by a sense of normalcy and peace. Sarah and I both thrived in our new environment, enjoying the freedom that came with living in a space that was truly our own. But the story of Lydia wasn't over, not by a long shot. One day, while we were both enjoying a rare Saturday off, we received a text message from Lydia. It was out of the blue, unexpected, and, quite frankly, unwelcome. Neither of us had heard from her since the last time she had cornered us at work, demanding answers about her room. We had assumed she had finally moved on, that the paranoia had subsided. But we were wrong. The text was short, terse, and filled with thinly veiled accusations. "I know you took my key. Give it back." Sarah and I stared at the message in disbelief, our eyes meeting in silent confusion. What key? We hadn't taken anything from Lydia. Why would we? But the tone of the message was unmistakable. Lydia was convinced that we had stolen something from her and she wasn't going to let it go. "What is she talking about?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with exasperation. "I have no idea," I replied, shaking my head. "We didn't take anything. She must be imagining things again." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. This is getting ridiculous. She's obsessed. What do we do? We debated how to respond, whether to ignore the message or try to reason with her. But reasoning with Lydia was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Frustrating, pointless, and ultimately impossible. In the end, we decided to respond with a simple, straightforward denial. We didn't take any key, Lydia. We have no idea what you're talking about. The reply came almost instantly, as if she had been waiting for our response. Don't lie to me, I know you have it. You're the only ones who could have taken it. The conversation continued in the same frustrating loop, with Lydia hurling accusations and us denying them. No matter what we said, she refused to believe us, her paranoia driving her to new heights of delusion. Finally, Sarah had enough. With a determined look in her eye, she decided to take a more direct approach. Lydia, we're not going to entertain this any longer. We didn't take your key. If you lost it, that's on you. Stop blaming us for your mistakes. The message was blunt, to the point, and hopefully final. We both hoped that it would put an end to the nonsense once and for all, but predictably, it didn't. Lydia continued to pester us, sending text after text, each one more frantic than the last. She claimed that the missing key was to a safe in her room, a safe that contained valuable items that she couldn't afford to lose. She was convinced that we had stolen the key and, by extension, whatever was in the safe. It was absurd, maddening, and completely unfounded, but Lydia wouldn't let it go. One evening, after another round of Lydia's paranoid messages, Sarah and I sat down to talk. It was clear that Lydia wasn't going to stop, and her constant harassment was starting to wear on us. We needed a plan, something that would put an end to this once and for all. Maybe we should just tell her the truth, Sarah suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. Tell her we didn't take anything, that we never even went into her room. I shook my head. She won't believe us. She's too far gone at this point. No matter what we say, she'll think we're lying. Sarah sighed, slumping back against the couch. I just want this to be over. I nodded in agreement, feeling the same sense of exhaustion. But then a thought occurred to me, something so ridiculous, so absurd that it might just work. What if we made her think she found the key? I said slowly, the idea forming in my mind as I spoke. Sarah looked at me, intrigued. How? Well, I began, choosing my words carefully. What if we planted a fake key somewhere she's likely to find it? Somewhere she wouldn't expect to find it, but not too obvious. We could make it look like it fell out of her things, or that it had been misplaced all along. Sarah's eyes widened as she considered the idea. You think she'd fall for it? I shrugged. Maybe. At this point, she's so desperate to find that key that she might believe anything. And if she thinks she found it, she might finally leave us alone. The plan was ridiculous, but it was also our best shot at ending the madness. Sarah and I spent the next hour brainstorming potential hiding spots, trying to figure out where Lydia might stumble upon the missing key. We decided on a location, a place in the office where Lydia often left her belongings. It was perfect. The next day at work, we executed our plan. We planted an old, unmarked key in the spot we had chosen, making sure it was slightly hidden, but still visible enough for Lydia to find. And then we waited. It didn't take long. That afternoon, Lydia found the key. We knew the moment it happened because she stopped sending us messages. There were no more accusations, no more frantic demands. For the first time in weeks, we had silence. Sarah and I exchanged a look of triumph. The plan had worked. Over the next few days, we watched as Lydia went about her business, seemingly content and no longer obsessed with the missing key. It was as if the discovery had finally quelled her paranoia, giving her the peace of mind she so desperately needed. For us, it was a victory, a small, absurd victory, but a victory nonetheless. Lydia's torment had ended, and with it, the final lingering remnants of our shared nightmare. Life returned to normal after that, or as normal as it could be when you're living in a foreign country, working a demanding job, and dealing with the aftermath of a truly bizarre living situation. But for the most part, Sarah and I were content. We had our peace, our privacy, and our freedom from Lydia's invasive behavior. But every now and then, I couldn't help but wonder about the real key, the one Lydia claimed was missing. Was there really a safe in her room? Did it really contain valuable items? Or was it all just a figment of her paranoid imagination? The thought nagged at me, even as I tried to push it aside. It wasn't my business, I told myself. I had escaped that toxic situation, and I had no reason to revisit it. But curiosity has a way of worming its way into your mind, refusing to let go. One day, a few months after the whole key fiasco, I ran into Lydia at a work event. It was an awkward encounter, to say the least. We hadn't spoken since the key incident, and I had no intention of rekindling any sort of relationship with her. But Lydia had other ideas. She approached me during a break, her demeanor strangely friendly, almost as if nothing had ever happened between us. "Hey," she said, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How's it going?" "Fine," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How about you?" "Oh, you know, the usual," she said with a casual shrug. "Work, life, all that." There was an awkward pause, and I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. I didn't want to prolong the conversation, but something about Lydia's sudden friendliness made me uneasy. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "I wanted to thank you for finding that key." I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "You know, the key to my safe," she continued, her smile widening. "I don't know how it ended up where it did, but I'm just glad I found it. I've been so worried about those items in my safe, and now I can finally relax." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The key she had found was fake, planted by Sarah and me. But Lydia seemed genuinely convinced that it was the real deal. No problem," I said awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. Lydia nodded, still smiling. "Yeah, I figured it was probably just a misunderstanding. But hey, all's well that ends well, right?" "Right," I echoed, feeling a sense of unease settle over me. Lydia's smile faltered slightly as if she could sense my discomfort. "Anyway," she said, her tone shifting, "I should get back, but take care, okay?" I nodded, watching as she walked away, her words still echoing in my mind. All's well that ends well, but something about it didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Lydia's story than met the eye. The safe, the missing key, the valuable items. It all seemed too convenient, too perfectly wrapped up. And then there was the question that had been nagging at me from the start. What was in that safe? The next day I confided in Sarah, telling her about my encounter with Lydia and the strange feeling it had left me with. To my surprise, she didn't dismiss my concerns. "Maybe we should have a look," Sarah suggested, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Look where?" I asked, confused. "In Lydia's room," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Maybe there's something in there that she doesn't want anyone to find. Something that would explain why she was so paranoid." I hesitated, the idea of breaking into Lydia's room again sending a shiver down my spine. But then curiosity got the better of me. "You really think we should?" I asked, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "It's worth a shot. We need closure on this, and maybe this is the only way to get it." And so, with a mixture of trepidation and determination, we set a plan in motion. Returning to Lydia's old apartment was like stepping back into a time warp. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different. The sense of familiarity was tinged with a strange sense of detachment, as if I was an intruder in a place I had once called home. Sarah and I had waited until Lydia was out of town for a work trip, ensuring that the apartment would be empty. We had contacted the landlord under the pretense of needing to retrieve some forgotten belongings, and he had reluctantly agreed to let us in. It was a flimsy excuse, but it worked. As we entered the apartment, the memories of our time there came flooding back. The tension, the paranoia, the constant feeling of being watched. But we weren't here to reminisce. We had a mission. Lydia's room was exactly as I remembered it, cluttered, chaotic, and filled with random items that seemed to serve no purpose. But our focus was on one thing, finding the safe. We searched the room methodically, starting with the obvious places, the closet, the dresser, under the bed. But there was no sign of a safe, no hidden compartment, no secret stash. "This is pointless," I muttered, feeling a sense of frustration building. Maybe there was never a safe to begin with. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. She continued to search, her eyes scanning the room with a determined focus. And then she found it. "Here!" Sarah called out, her voice tinged with excitement. I rushed over to where she was standing, and there it was. hidden behind a stack of old books on a shelf, a small, inconspicuous safe. It was the kind you might find in a hotel room, the kind meant to hold passports and small valuables. The sight of it sent a thrill of anticipation through me. This was it, the mystery we had been trying to solve for months. But there was one problem. "How do we open it?" Sarah asked, her excitement dampened by the realization that we didn't have the code. I frowned, staring at the safe, trying to think. Maybe we can figure it out. What's the most obvious code she'd use? We tried a few guesses, her birth date, the apartment number, even her old phone number, but nothing worked. Each attempt was met with the same frustrating beep of rejection. "Maybe it's something personal," Sarah suggested, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Something only she would know." And then it hit me. "The fake key," I said slowly, the pieces falling into place in my mind. What if she changed the code after she found that key? What if it's something related to that? Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what I was getting at. "You mean the date she found the key?" It was a long shot, but we had nothing to lose. I punched in the date, month, day, year, and held my breath as I pressed the final button. There was a pause, and then, to our amazement, the safe clicked open. We exchanged a look of disbelief, hardly able to believe our luck. But the excitement was quickly replaced by a sense of trepidation. What were we about to find? With a deep breath, I opened the safe. Inside, there were a few items, nothing too surprising at first glance. Some documents, a small velvet pouch, a set of keys. But there was one item that caught my eye, something that sent a shiver down my spine. A photograph. It was old, faded, and slightly torn around the edges, but it was unmistakable. The photograph showed a young Lydia standing next to a man who looked eerily familiar. "What's this?" Sarah asked, peering over my shoulder. I stared at the photo, my mind racing as I tried to place the man's face. And then it clicked. It was the landlord, the same man who had let us into the apartment. But that wasn't what shocked me the most. It was the date written on the back of the photograph, the same date we had used to unlock the safe, the date Lydia had found the fake key. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with shock. I didn't have an answer, but as I stared at the photograph, a sense of dread washed over me. There was something deeply unsettling about the connection between Lydia and the landlord, something that didn't add up. We quickly replaced the items in the safe, our curiosity now replaced by a sense of urgency to leave. We closed the safe, wiped away any trace of our presence, and hurried out of the apartment, our minds racing with questions. As we left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had uncovered something we were never meant to find. The mystery of Lydia's paranoia, the missing key, the safe, and the photograph, it all pointed to something darker, something that went far beyond our petty revenge plot. But whatever it wasn't our problem anymore. Sarah and I agreed never to speak of what we had found, to leave the past behind and move on with our lives. We had escaped Lydia's web, and we weren't about to get tangled up in whatever secrets she was hiding. But the memory of that photograph, the look on Lydia's face when she found the fake key, and the landlord's unsettling familiarity would haunt me for years to come. Sometimes, it's better to leave well enough alone. Sometimes, the mysteries we try to solve only lead to more questions, and sometimes, the best revenge is knowing when to walk away. But deep down, I knew that the story wasn't over, not really. Lydia's secrets were still out there waiting to be uncovered, and part of me couldn't help but wonder if one day they would come back to haunt us.